The last time my husband, Mark, kissed me with any real feeling, the winning lottery numbers were already printed on a slip of paper, folded neatly in his wallet. He didn't know it yet, of course, and I didn't realize that the kiss was a lie, a performance for a life he was already planning to leave behind. All I knew was the familiar pressure of his lips and the scent of the cheap pine-scented air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror of his truck. He was heading off for a weekend fishing trip with his buddies, or so he said. "Don't spend all our winnings while I'm gone," he chuckled, tapping the pocket of his worn jeans where he kept his wallet. It was our little joke. For 15 years, every Saturday he'd buy a lottery ticket with the exact numbers. Our anniversary, my birthday, the day we moved into our house. It was a ritual, a tiny $20 beacon of hope in a life that had become, well, predictable. But that night, as I lay in our bed, the silence of the house felt different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a night to myself. It was a hollow, echoing void. Something had been off for months. A subtle chill that had crept into the spaces between us. It was in the way his phone was always face down on the nightstand, in the vague answers about late nights at work, in the flicker of something unreadable in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. I told myself I was being foolish. This is what happens after 2 decades together, I'd reason. The fire settles into embers. But my intuition, that quiet, persistent voice I had learned to ignore for the sake of peace, was screaming at me. And that night, it was a siren I could no longer silence. I don't know what compelled me to get out of bed, to walk to the dresser where he'd emptied his pockets before packing his fishing gear. His wallet was there, sitting next to a loose handful of change. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I felt like a thief in my own home, my own life. My hands trembled as I opened it. Tucked behind his driver's license was the lottery ticket, and underneath it, folded into a tiny, tight square, was another piece of paper, a receipt. It was from a jewelry store in a town 2 hours away. A woman's diamond necklace, purchased 2 days ago. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the cost that made the air leave my lungs, though it was more than we could comfortably afford. It was the name on the gift receipt, printed in neat, elegant script, "For my forever love, Chloe." Our life hadn't always been one of secrets and silent accusations. It had been built on a foundation of shared dreams and simple pleasures. I recall when we first purchased our small house on Maple Street. It was a fixer-upper with peeling paint and floors that creaked a symphony with every step, but it was ours. We spent that first summer stripping wallpaper and painting walls, our clothes splattered with beige and eggshell white, our laughter echoing in the empty rooms. Mark would put on old Motown records and we'd dance in the living room, dust motes swirling around us in the late afternoon sun. He was a good man, or he had been. He worked as a foreman at the local construction company, his hands calloused and strong. He'd come home smelling of sawdust and sweat, and the first thing he'd always do was find me in the kitchen and wrap his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder as I stirred a pot on the stove. "What's for dinner, beautiful?" he'd murmur into my hair. We weren't rich, not by a long shot. We lived paycheck to paycheck, juggling the mortgage, car payments, and the ever-rising cost of just living. There were lean years, especially after the plant downsized and Mark's overtime hours were cut. We learned to be frugal. We grew our own vegetables in a small garden out back. I became an expert at patching worn-out jeans, and our date nights were more often a rented movie and a shared bowl of popcorn than a fancy dinner out. The lottery was Mark's one small indulgence, his weekly dose of what if. On Saturday nights, we'd sit on our worn floral sofa, the one with the permanent indentations from where we always sat, and watch the numbers roll across the television screen. "Okay, if we win tonight," he'd start, his eyes gleaming with a boyish excitement. "First thing, we pay off this house. And then we go to Italy," I'd add, leaning my head on his shoulder. "See the Colosseum, eat real pasta until we can't move. And I'll buy you that little convertible you've always wanted," he'd finish, squeezing my hand. It was a fantasy, a harmless game we played to escape the pressure. The tickets would pile up in a small wooden box he kept on his desk, a collection of failed dreams. But the hope was the critical part. It was the belief that one day a little bit of magic could change everything. Looking back, I realize now he wasn't just dreaming of paying off the house or taking a trip to Italy. He was dreaming of a completely different life, and I was never a part of it. The jewelry receipt wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a roadmap to his new world, and Chloe was his destination. The cold, hard dread that had started in my stomach now spread through my entire body, turning my veins to ice. The man I had shared my life with, the man I had loved and trusted, was a stranger, and I was standing alone in the ruins of a life I thought we had built together. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled to fold the receipt back into its tiny, sharp-edged square. I tucked it back under the lottery ticket, slid the wallet closed and placed it on the dresser exactly as I had found it. My own reflection in the mirror was a stranger, a woman with wide, terrified eyes and a pale, drawn face. Every instinct screamed at me to throw the wallet against the wall, to smash the mirror, to call his phone and cry until my voice was raw. But a chilling, unfamiliar calm washed over me instead. It was the calm of a ship's captain who has just heard the first groan of splitting timber deep in the hull. Panic is a luxury you can no longer afford. The weekend passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I tended to my garden, pulling weeds with a vicious, focused energy. I scrubbed the kitchen floor on my hands and knees until the lemon scent of the cleaner burned my nostrils and the old linoleum gleamed. I was trying to wash away the filth I felt inside, the stain of his betrayal. Every time the phone rang, my heart leaped into my throat, but it was just my sister or a telemarketer. He didn't call, not once. In 15 years of fishing trips, he had always called at least once a day to check in. The silence was his confession. When he returned on Sunday evening, he walked in with a theatrical sigh of exhaustion, dropping his duffel bag by the door. "Barely a nibble all weekend," he announced, forcing a weary smile. But the peace and quiet was worth it. He came to kiss me and I turned my head just enough that his lips landed on my cheek. It was a clumsy, cold gesture. I felt his slight hesitation, the flicker of confusion in his eyes. But he let it go. He smelled of fresh air and gasoline, but underneath it, I imagined I could smell the faint floral perfume of a woman named Chloe. That night, I lay beside him in the dark, my body as stiff as a board. I listened to the rhythm of his breathing, a sound that had once been my comfort, my lullaby. Now it sounded like the slow, steady ticking of a bomb. I waited until his breath deepened into the heavy, slow cadence of sleep. Then, with the stealth of a cat, I slipped out of bed. His phone was on the nightstand, face down as it always was. My whole body trembled as I picked it up. This felt like the true point of no return. Looking in his wallet was an impulse. This was a choice, a cold, deliberate violation. But the woman with the terrified eyes in the mirror whispered, "Asterisk, you have to know. You deserve the truth." Asterisk. His passcode was our anniversary. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. My thumb hovered over the screen and then I opened his messages. It didn't take long to find her. Chloe. Her name was saved with a single red heart emoji beside it. The messages were a novel of our undoing, hundreds of them stretching back for months. Asterisk, thinking of you. Can't wait to see you. She has no idea. Asterisk, I saw pictures of them together. Him smiling wider than I'd seen him smile in years. His arm wrapped around a woman with bright blonde hair and a dazzling, unlined face. She couldn't have been more than 25. They were at a bar laughing. They were in a car, her head on his shoulder. They were standing in front of the same jewelry store from the receipt, pointing at something in the window. I scrolled and scrolled, each message a fresh stab to the heart. I read about how he felt trapped and how I no longer understood him. He was biding his time. The words blurred through my tears. He had painted me as a warden, our home as a prison, our life together as a sentence he was serving. And then I saw it, the message that stopped the world. It was from 2 nights ago, just before he'd left for his fishing trip. It was from him to her. Asterisk, just bought our weekly ticket. Keep your fingers crossed, baby. When our numbers hit, it's goodbye to this miserable life and hello to ours. We'll be on a beach in Mexico before she even knows what happened. She can have the house and the debt. We'll have the world. Attached was a photo of the lottery ticket, our numbers, our anniversary, my birthday, the date we moved into this house. He was using the story of our life to finance his escape from it. The breath I was holding came out in a ragged, silent sob. The phone felt like it was burning my hand. It wasn't just cheating. It was a conspiracy. He wasn't just leaving me, he was planning to rob me. To leave me with nothing but the empty shell of a life he had already discarded, while he and his new love drank margaritas on a beach, paid for by the ghost of our shared history. I carefully placed the phone back on the nightstand, precisely as it had been. I wiped my eyes, my tears turning from hot grief to icy rage. I walked back to our bed, but I didn't get in. I stood there, looking down at the man sleeping so peacefully, the man who had woven our sacred numbers into a tapestry of deceit. The little wooden box of old, losing lottery tickets was on his desk in the spare room, and in that moment a plan began to form. It was cold, clear, and sharp as a shard of broken glass. He wanted to watch my world burn, but he had forgotten one thing. He had taught me how to play with fire. The next morning was Saturday, the day of the draw. The air in the house was thick with unspoken words. A silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. I made coffee, the gurgle of the machine sounding unnaturally loud. Mark came into the kitchen, stretching and yawning. He was acting, performing the role of the devoted husband, and I, in turn, was performing the role of the unsuspecting wife. We were 2 actors in a play, and only one of us knew the final act. Morning. he said, his voice a little too cheerful. He came up behind me and put his hands on my shoulders. I flinched, a slight, involuntary jerk. He noticed. "You okay? You seem tense," he said, his voice laced with a faux concern that made my skin crawl. "Just a headache," I lied, moving away to pour the coffee. "Didn't sleep well. Maybe you're coming down with something." He took his mug, his eyes scanning my face. He was looking for cracks, for any sign that I knew. I gave him nothing. I gave him a small, tired smile and turned my attention to making toast, focusing on the simple mechanical task of spreading butter on bread. All day, an electric current of anxiety ran just beneath my skin. I went through the motions of a typical Saturday: laundry, grocery shopping, paying a few bills online. But my mind was a whirlwind. My plan was simple, born of that cold, apparent rage from the night before. But it was also terrifying. It relied on chance, on luck, and on my ability to hold my nerve. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room, Mark grew restless. He kept checking his watch, pacing between the kitchen and the living room. "The lottery drawing was at 9 o'clock. Feeling lucky tonight?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the chaos inside me. He grinned, a broad, predatory smile that no longer reached his eyes. "You know it. I've got a real good feeling about tonight. A life-changing feeling." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Oh, you have no idea," I thought. He settled onto the sofa, pulling his wallet from his back pocket. He took out the ticket, the one from the photo he'd sent Chloe, and laid it on the coffee table with a sense of ceremony. He smoothed it out with his thumb, his gaze fixed on it like a holy relic. "There she is," he said, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "Our ticket to freedom." The word "ours" was a dagger. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I retreated to the kitchen under the pretense of getting us some drinks. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold the glasses. I poured us both a glass of water, my mind racing. I had to do it now. It had to be now. The small wooden box of old lottery tickets was on the desk in the spare room. I had gone through it earlier in the day, my heart pounding with each slip of paper I unfolded. I was looking for one that looked recent, not too creased, not too faded. I found a perfect candidate about a month ago. Same terminal, same font, just different dates and, of course, different numbers. It was now tucked into the pocket of my cardigan. I took a deep breath, clutching the 2 glasses of water. This was it. As I walked back into the living room, I stumbled. It wasn't a real stumble, but a carefully orchestrated bit of theater. I let out a small cry as one of the glasses tipped, sending a cascade of ice-cold water all over the coffee table. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," I gasped, my voice a pitch-perfect imitation of flustered surprise. Mark leaped up. "Damn it, Sarah," he snapped, his eyes wide with panic as the water spread, darkening the wood and pooling around the lottery ticket. The ticket! He snatched it up, but it was already soaked, the ink starting to look fuzzy. "It's ruined," he cried, his voice filled with genuine horror. "I'm so sorry, honey, I don't know what happened, I just tripped," I babbled, grabbing a dish towel from the kitchen and rushing back. While he was frantically dabbing at the soggy ticket, his back partially to me, my hand slipped into my pocket. My fingers closed around the dry, crisp, fake ticket. He was so focused on his precious slip of paper, so consumed by the fear of losing his prize, that he didn't see my other hand slide the worthless ticket from my pocket and onto the far side of the coffee table, partially hidden by a stack of magazines. "It might still be okay," I said, my voice trembling with manufactured anxiety. "As long as the barcode is readable, they can scan it." He held it up to the light, his face a mask of despair. "It's a mess. The numbers are smudging." He was so agitated, so distraught, that his usual perceptiveness was gone. He was a cornered animal, seeing only the threat. And then I saw it. "Wait," I said, my voice soft. I pointed toward the magazines. "What's that?" He followed my finger. He saw the other ticket, dry and pristine, his brow furrowed in confusion. He picked it up. "What the?" He looked from the wet, ruined ticket in one hand to the dry, perfect one in the other. This was the most dangerous part of my plan. The part that relied entirely on his own greed and desperation. "That's strange," I said, peering at it. "Did you buy 2 this week?" He stared at it, his mind clearly racing, trying to make sense of it. I could almost see the gears turning. He looked at the date on the ticket. It was last month's date. But in his panic, in his desperate will to believe, he wouldn't look that closely. He would see what he wanted to see. I don't remember," he said slowly. Then a slow smile spread across his face, a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. "Maybe I did. Maybe I bought one earlier in the week and forgot. Yeah, that must be it." He looked at me, seeking confirmation. I just shrugged. "Well, thank goodness you did. Look at this one," I said, pointing to the soggy mess in his other hand. "That one's a goner." He tossed the wet ticket, the real winning ticket, onto the damp towel on the table without a second glance. His eyes were glued to the fake one, the worthless one, the one that was now his only hope. He had convinced himself. His own desperation had sealed his fate. He carefully folded the fake ticket and put it back in his wallet, his treasure safe once more. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with that manic, feverish light. "See, I told you. I have a life-changing feeling about tonight." I just smiled and sat down, my body feeling strangely light. The play was set. The actors were in position. All we had to do was wait for the curtain to rise. The half hour leading up to the lottery draw was the longest 30 minutes of my life. Mark was practically vibrating with nervous energy. He couldn't sit still. He paced the worn path on our living room carpet, checking his watch every 30 seconds. And kept taking the fake ticket out of his wallet to stare at it, as if his gaze alone could will the numbers into existence. I sat on the sofa, a book open in my lap, pretending to read. The words were just black squiggles on a page. My entire universe was coiled into a tight, dense ball in the pit of my stomach. The familiar, jaunty theme music for the lottery drawing began, and Mark scrambled for the remote, turning the volume up. He sat on the edge of the coffee table, leaning forward, his body taut as a bowstring. He had the fake ticket in one hand and a pen in the other, ready to circle the numbers. "Okay, here we go," he breathed, his eyes glued to the screen. "Come on, baby. Come on." The first plastic ball tumbled down the chute. The announcer called out the number. 17. Mark let out a whoop. "Yes, we got it." He scribbled a frantic circle around the number 17 on the ticket. It was my birthday. Of course it was on the ticket. It was on every ticket he'd ever bought. The second ball dropped. 31. "Yes," he shouted again, circling the number. "Our anniversary." My own heart was pounding, a sick, frantic rhythm. I knew the numbers by heart. I knew they were all going to be called. I had seen them in the photo he'd sent to Chloe. I was the only person in this room who knew that the real winning ticket, a soggy, forgotten scrap of paper, was lying in a damp heap on the kitchen counter. The third number was called. 8. The day we moved into this house. He circled it, his hand shaking. The 4th, the 5th, the 6th. With each number, his excitement grew increasingly frenzied. He was shouting, laughing, and pounding his fist on the table. "I don't believe it. I don't believe it, Sarah. We got them all. We got them all." When the final number was announced, he leaped to his feet, his face flushed, his eyes wild. He held the worthless piece of paper up like a trophy. "We won. We actually won. Oh my God, Sarah, we're rich." He lunged at me, grabbing me in a hug so tight it squeezed the air from my lungs. He was lifting me, spinning me around, his laughter echoing in the small room. It was a terrifying, suffocating embrace. I felt nothing. My body was limp in his arms, my face pressed against his shoulder. All I could feel was the cold, hard knot of ice in my chest. He finally put me down, his hands on my shoulders, his eyes searching my face. "Why aren't you screaming? We're millionaires. Our lives are about to change forever." I managed to convey a look of stunned disbelief. I don't know what to say, Mark. I can't believe it." My voice was a whisper. It was the best I could manage. His face softened. "I know, baby. It's a lot to take in." He hugged me again, a gentler hug this time. "Everything's going to be different now. Everything's going to be better." He spent the next hour in a state of delirium. He was on his phone, frantically searching for the official jackpot amount. $812 million, he whispered, his voice trembling with awe. 812. He calculated the lump sum payout after taxes, scribbling figures on the back of an envelope. His eyes were glazed over with dollar signs. Then he stood up, a strange look on his face, a look of resolve. "I have to do something," he said. He walked over to the telephone on the end table and dialed a number. "Yeah, Bill? It's Mark. I quit." There was a pause. Mark laughed, a sharp, arrogant sound. "No, I'm not kidding. I just won the lottery. Yeah, the big one. So you can take that foreman job and shove it. I'm done." He slammed the phone down, a triumphant smirk on his face. He had just torched a 25-year career without a moment's hesitation. My blood ran cold. This was happening faster than I could have imagined. He was burning his bridges with an almost gleeful abandon. But he wasn't finished. He picked up his cell phone. I knew who he was calling. My stomach twisted into a painful knot. He walked into the kitchen thinking he was out of earshot. But the house was small and his voice, charged with adrenaline and excitement, carried. "Chloe? We did it, baby. We did it. It's all happening just like we planned. No, I haven't told her yet. I'm going to do it now. My new life starts tonight. Yeah, you just sit tight. I'll call you when it's done. We'll be on that beach by the end of the week. I love you." He clicked off the phone and walked back into the living room. The triumphant smirk was gone, replaced by a look of solemn, theatrical gravity. He was ready for his next performance. the heartbroken husband. He sat down opposite me, leaning forward and taking my hands in his. His palms were sweaty. "Sarah," he began, his voice low and serious. "We need to talk." I looked at him, my expression carefully blank. I let him see the feigned confusion, the dawning worry. I was a brilliant actress. He had taught me well. "What is it, Mark? You're scaring me." He took a deep breath, like a grown-up about to dive into icy water. "This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do," he said, looking down at our intertwined hands. "I haven't been happy for a long time, Sarah. We've grown apart. We want different things." He was reciting the cheater's script, word for word. I had read it all in his text messages. "I've met someone," he said, finally looking up, his eyes filled with a counterfeit sorrow. "I'm in love with her, and I'm leaving." He let the words hang in the air, expecting them to shatter me. He expected tears, screaming, begging. He expected the scene he had rehearsed in his mind, the scene that would justify his escape. I gave him none of it. I slowly pulled my hands from his. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the dark street. I could feel his eyes on my back, confused by my silence. I turned around to face him. My heart was a frozen block of ice, but my voice was calm, deceptively calm. "Her name is Chloe, right?" I asked. The color drained from his face. His jaw went slack. How did you know that?" "You talk in your sleep," I lied. It was a cleaner, more straightforward explanation than the truth. Let him think I was a fool until the very end. He was flustered, entirely thrown off his script. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." "You're not sorry, Mark," I said, my voice still quiet, but with an edge of steel he had never heard before. "You're just sorry you got caught. But it doesn't matter. You have your money. You have your new life. You can go." His shock quickly morphed back into confidence, buoyed by the $100 million he believed was waiting for him. "You're right," he said, standing up. "It's for the best. You can have the house." "I don't want it." Of course he didn't. He thought he was walking into a mansion. He went into the bedroom and came out a few minutes later with a hastily packed duffel bag, the same one from his fishing trip. He stopped at the door, his hand on the knob. "The lottery claim office opens at 9 a.m. on Monday," he said. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings. We can make this quick and clean." "Okay, Mark," I said. He looked at me one last time, a flicker of something, maybe guilt, maybe surprise at my composure, in his eyes. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the giddy excitement of his new, golden future. Then he opened the door and walked out, closing it softly behind him. The click of the latch echoed through the silent house. I stood there for a long time, just listening to the sound of his truck starting, the engine revving, and then the sound fading into the distance. He was gone. I walked into the kitchen and picked up the soggy, ruined piece of paper from the counter. The real lottery ticket. I smoothed it out as best I could. The numbers, our numbers, were blurred but still legible. $112 million. I folded it carefully and tucked it safely into my pocket. Monday was 2 days away, and it was going to be a very, very interesting day. The weekend was a strange, surreal limbo. The house was quieter than it had ever been, but my mind was screaming. I moved through the empty rooms like a ghost, touching the furniture, running my hand along the frame of our wedding photo on the mantelpiece. Mark's face smiled back at me, a younger, more hopeful version of the man who had just walked out of my life. I took the photo down and placed it face down in a drawer. I couldn't bear to look at him. I didn't cry. The tears were frozen somewhere deep inside me, a solid block of grief and rage. Instead, a cold, methodical clarity took over. On Sunday, I made a phone call. I found the name of the best divorce lawyer in the state, a woman renowned for her sharp mind and take-no-prisoners attitude in the courtroom. I scheduled a consultation for Monday afternoon. I told her assistant it was a matter of some urgency. Then I sat down at the desk where Mark kept his box of failed dreams. I took out the real winning ticket. The paper was now dry, stiff, and crinkled. I stared at the numbers, our numbers, now a symbol of his ultimate betrayal. I took a photo of it with my phone front and back. I emailed the pictures to my new private email address, which I had created the previous week. Then I placed the ticket inside a heavy book and slid it onto the highest shelf of the bookcase, hidden behind a set of old encyclopedias. Thought about Mark. I imagined him with Chloe, celebrating their newfound fortune. Were they in a fancy hotel? Were they looking at travel brochures for Mexico? Were they laughing about me, the poor, clueless wife he had left behind with a house full of debt? The thought sent a jolt of bitter fire through my veins, but I pushed it down. Their celebration was a fantasy built on a lie. The bill was coming due. Monday morning arrived, gray and drizzling, the sky mirroring the somber mood that had settled over the town and my heart. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table watching the clock on the wall. The lottery claim office opened at 9. I imagined Mark, dressed in his best clothes, his heart pounding with anticipation, walking through those doors. I imagined him presenting the worthless ticket, the one I had so carefully swapped. The phone rang at precisely 9:17 a.m. I knew it would be him. I let it ring 4 times, then picked it up. "Hello," I said, my voice calm. "Sarah." It was Mark, and his voice was a frantic, panicked squeak. It was the voice of a man whose entire world had just been pulled out from under him. "Sarah, something's wrong." "What is it, Mark?" I asked, feigning concern. "The ticket. They're saying it's not the winner. They're saying it's from last month. They're saying it's worthless." His voice was cracking, rising in hysteria. "But it has to be. I checked the numbers myself. We both saw them." I stayed silent for a moment, letting him stew in his own panic. "Well, that is strange," I said slowly. "Are you sure you gave them the right one?" "Of course I gave them the right one. It's the only one I have," he shrieked. And then I could hear the dawning, horrified suspicion in his voice. "The water, when you spilled the water, Sarah. There was another ticket. Where is the other one? The one that got wet?" This was the moment, the culmination of my cold, calculated plan. I took a slow sip of my tea. "Oh, that old thing," I said, my voice light and airy. "I was cleaning up the mess you left and it was all soggy and ruined. I threw it out with the rest of the trash this morning." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. It was a silence so complete I could hear the static, the vast space where his dreams used to be. You what?" he finally whispered. His voice was hollow, devoid of all its earlier arrogance. "I threw it away, Mark," I repeated, my voice hardening. "It was a ruined piece of paper. You said so yourself. You had the good one, remember? The one you kept safe in your wallet. The one you were so sure was your ticket to freedom." "No, no, no, no," he chanted, his voice breaking. "That was it. That was the ticket. The wet one was the winner. You have to find it, Sarah. Go look in the trash. It's worth $112 million. "Why would I do that, Mark?" I asked, my voice now as cold as ice. "So you and Chloe can run off to Mexico? So you can leave me with the house and the debt while you live a life of luxury built on my back? On the history you threw away like it was nothing." He started stammering, sputtering. What, Chloe? I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, cut the act," I snapped, my composure finally cracking, the rage I had held back all weekend finally boiling over. "I know everything. I know about Chloe. I know about the necklace. I know about the plan to leave me with nothing. I read the messages, Mark. Asterisk. When our numbers hit, it's goodbye to this miserable life and hello to ours. Asterisk, you didn't just cheat on me. You plotted against me. You used the numbers of our life together to plan your escape." He was speechless. There was only the sound of his ragged, desperate breathing. "You made your choice, Mark," I said, my voice dropping back to that icy calm. "You chose her. You chose the money. You told me to my face you were leaving me. You quit your job. You burned every bridge you had because you were so sure you had it all figured out." I paused, letting the weight of his actions settle on him. "You don't have the money, Mark. You don't have a job. And as of this morning, you don't have a home to come back to." I changed the locks. A strangled, guttural sound came from the end of the phone. A sound of pure animal despair. "What about the ticket, Sarah?" he begged, his voice a pathetic whimper. "Where is the real ticket?" I looked at the clock. It was almost 10 o'clock for my next appointment. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," I said, and I hung up the phone. I sat there in the quiet kitchen, the receiver still warm in my hand. There was no triumph, no elation. Just a vast, aching emptiness. I had won. I had protected myself. I had delivered a justice so perfect, so poetically ironic, it was almost cruel. But my life was still in pieces. The man I had loved for 20 years was a stranger. And my future was a blank, terrifying page. The public fallout was about to begin and I knew it would be messy. But for the first time in months I felt like I could breathe again. The performance was over. The story, as stories in small towns do, spread like wildfire. It started as whispers. Mark hadn't shown up for his usual Tuesday morning coffee with his old work buddies. Someone from the construction company mentioned he'd quit in a blaze of glory, claiming he'd won the lottery. Then came the rumors from the lottery office. A man matching Mark's description had caused a scene on Monday morning, screaming about a lost ticket, claiming he'd been cheated out of $100 million jackpot. He'd apparently been so disruptive they'd had to call security to escort him out. By midweek, it was the only topic anyone was discussing. The narrative he had tried to create, the lucky winner escaping his old life, had curdled into something pathetic and sad. He was no longer the man who had won the lottery. He was the man who had thought he'd won the lottery, quit his job, and then had a public meltdown. My phone rang constantly. My sister, my friends, and my neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. They had all heard the story. "Sarah, are you okay?" my sister Clara asked, her voice tight with worry. "People are saying the most insane things about Mark." I decided then and there that I would not be a part of the spectacle. I would not feed the gossip mill. Mark had created his own public circus. I wanted no part in it. We're getting a divorce, Clara, I said simply. He wasn't the man I thought he was. That's all I'm going to say about it. My quiet dignity confused people more than any dramatic accusation would have. In the absence of a screaming, hysterical wife, the town's sympathy, which might have been divided, settled squarely on me. I was the wronged woman, the one holding her head high while her husband publicly imploded. They didn't know the half of it, of course. They didn't know about Chloe or the conspiracy or the swap ticket, and I intended to keep it that way. The truth was my private shield, not a public weapon. The real confrontation came a week later. There was a knock on the door. I looked through the peephole and saw Mark standing on the porch. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his face was gaunt and unshaven, and his eyes were hollowed out, filled with a desperate, haunted look. He was wearing the same clothes he'd had on 3 days ago. The swagger was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was a broken man. I opened the door but left the chain on. "Sarah," he croaked. His voice was raw. "Please, we have to talk." "There's nothing to talk about, Mark," I said, my voice even. "I told you to have your lawyer contact mine. She left me," he blurted out, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Chloe. The second she found out there was no money, she was gone. Packed her bags and disappeared. Won't even answer my calls." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. "I'm shocked," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "I thought it was true love." He had the grace to flinch. "I made a mistake, Sarah. A terrible, terrible mistake. I was a fool. I threw everything away for nothing." He pressed his forehead against the door, his eyes squeezed shut. "Please. The ticket. Just tell me you still have it. We can still fix this. We can split it. You can have more than half, I don't care. But don't throw it all away, please." I looked at him, at this stranger on my doorstep begging for a fortune he had intended to steal from me. The anger I had felt was gone, replaced by a profound and weary sadness. He hadn't learned a thing. Even now, his regret wasn't about his betrayal, his lies, or the pain he had caused me. It was about the money. It had only ever been about the money. "There is no we anymore, Mark," I said softly. "You destroyed that. The ticket isn't a magic wand that can fix what you broke. What you did, it can't be undone. The trust is gone forever." He began to sob then, great, heaving, pathetic sobs. It was a horrifying sound. He slid down the door until he was sitting on the porch, his head in his hands. "What am I going to do?" he wept. "I have nothing. I have no job, no money, nowhere to go." For a fleeting second, a flicker of the old me, the caretaker, the wife, felt a pang of pity. But I stamped it out. Pity was a luxury I couldn't afford. Pity was what had kept me ignoring the red flags for months. "You'll figure it out," I said, my voice hardening again. "You were so eager to start your new life. Well, here it is." I closed the door, shutting out the sound of his weeping. I leaned my back against it, my legs trembling. There was no satisfaction in his ruin. There was no joy in his pain. There was just the grim, hollow finality of it all. It was over. Truly and completely over. His public consequence wasn't just the loss of the money. It was the loss of everything, stripped bare for the whole world to see. He hadn't just lost a lottery ticket. He had lost his life, his dignity, and his soul, all for a future that never existed. And he had no one to blame but himself. In the weeks that followed, I began the quiet, unglamorous work of rebuilding. The house that had once felt like a prison of secrets now felt like a sanctuary. It was my space, filled only with my own presence, my own thoughts. The silence was no longer hollow. It was peaceful. I started with small things. I rearranged the living room furniture, breaking the old, familiar layout that held so many memories of him. I bought new sheets for the bed, a crisp, clean floral pattern that smelled of lavender and new beginnings. I met with my lawyer, Mrs. Davis. She was a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I found incredibly reassuring. I sat in her plush office, the scent of old books and lemon polish in the air, and for the first time I told the whole story. I told her about Chloe, the text messages, the planned escape, and the swapped lottery ticket. I left nothing out. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, looking at me over the top of her glasses. I expected judgment or perhaps shock. Instead, she gave a slow, measured nod. "Well," she said, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips, "that was exceptionally clever, Mrs. Peterson. And then we got to the matter of the ticket, the real one, the $112 million question mark that hung over my entire future. Legally," she explained, her voice precise, "the ticket was purchased during the marriage. In this state that makes it marital property, he would be entitled to half." My heart sank. The idea of him getting a single penny of that money after what he had done was nauseating. "However," she continued, holding up a finger, "given the circumstances, the documented infidelity, the clear intent to defraud you and abscond with the full amount, leaving you with all marital debt. We have a very, very strong case to argue for a disproportionate distribution of assets. A very strong case. She advised me not to cash the ticket immediately. We needed to initiate the divorce proceedings. We would use the existence of the ticket as leverage. Mark and his cut-rate lawyer, desperate for any piece of the pie, would likely agree to a settlement far more favorable to me than if we went to trial. The process was excruciating. His lawyer sent letter after letter, first demanding half, then threatening to sue me for fraud, then pleading for a settlement. Mark called me from blocked numbers, leaving rambling, weeping voicemails, alternating between begging for my forgiveness and cursing my name. I deleted them all without listening to the end. I let Mrs. Davis handle everything. She was my shield, my fortress, and she was worth every penny. Ultimately, Mark's desperation and limited resources worked in my favor. He had no money to fund a protracted legal battle. Faced with the mountain of evidence Mrs. Davis had compiled, the text messages, the jewelry receipt, an affidavit from his former boss about the manner in which he quit, he crumbled. We settled out of court. He signed the divorce papers, relinquishing all claims to the house, my pension, and any future assets. In exchange, Mrs. Davis had structured a settlement. After cashing the ticket and paying the taxes, a sum of $500,000 would be placed into a trust for him. He couldn't touch the principal, but he would receive a small monthly stipend, enough to live on but not enough to live lavishly. It was not a reward. It was, as Mrs. Davis called it, go-away money. It ensured he would never have a reason to bother me again. It was a clean break. The day I walked into the lottery headquarters to claim the prize, I went alone. I wore a simple gray dress and my hair was tied back. There were no cameras, no press conference. I had arranged it all through my lawyer. I handed over the crinkled, unassuming piece of paper. The clerk scanned the barcode. The machine beeped, and just like that, my life changed forever. But it wasn't the way Mark had imagined. There was no wild celebration, no popping champagne corks. As I walked out of that building holding the receipt for my future, I didn't feel rich. I just felt free. Free from the weight of his lies. Free from the slow-motion heartbreak of the last few years. Free from the life I had been living, which I now realized had been a cage, albeit a comfortable one. I didn't buy a convertible or a mansion. I paid off the mortgage on my little house on Maple Street. I set up a college fund for my sister's kids. I donated a significant amount to a local women's shelter, the kind that helps women leave situations like the one I had just escaped. And then I bought a plane ticket, just one, to Italy. As the plane climbed into the clouds, I looked out the window at the world shrinking below. I thought about the life I was leaving behind and the one I was flying toward. The pain of Mark's betrayal was still there, a scar on my heart that would likely never fully fade. But it no longer defined me. It was a part of my story, but it was not the whole story. I had discovered a strength in myself I never knew I possessed. I had faced the worst kind of betrayal and had not only survived, but I had quietly, cleverly, and gracefully won. The lesson I realized was not about revenge. Revenge is a hot, fleeting thing. This was about justice. It was about reclaiming my life and my story. Mark thought the lottery ticket was his ticket to freedom, but in the end it was mine. It's a strange thing what happens when the foundation of your life cracks. For 20 years, my marriage to Mark was the ground beneath my feet. It wasn't always perfect, but it was solid. And then, in an instant, I learned it was all just a thin veneer over a hollow space. Many people who heard whispers of the story probably thought the money was the prize, that winning the jackpot was the ultimate victory. However, the truth is that the money was never the point. It was a tool. It was the key that unlocked the cage I didn't even realize I was in. It bought me my freedom, my security, and most importantly, it bought me peace. The real prize wasn't the $100 million. It was the quiet mornings in my own home, the ability to breathe without waiting for the other shoe to drop, the chance to get on a plane and see a part of the world I had only ever dreamed of. What I did that night, swapping those two little slips of paper, wasn't an act I take lightly. It was born from a place of deep pain and desperation. It was the only move I had left on the board. I didn't do it to destroy him. I did it to save myself. He had already lit the match and was preparing to burn my world to the ground for his own gain. All I did was make sure he was the only one who got caught in the fire he started. And as I sit here now, in the quiet of my own life, a life I built for myself from the ashes of another, I sometimes wonder about the path I chose. It leads me to a question that I still ponder on sleepless nights. Do you believe there's a difference between revenge and justice? And if you were in my shoes, would you have been able to walk that line? I would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for sharing this time with me and for listening to my story. Take care of yourselves and always remember the value of your own peace.